Good morning, everyone. This is Riani Cabel. Moving forth, my discussion delves into the two approaches to utilitarianism, namely act and rule utilitarianism. So, to start, utilitarianism stands on the belief that the best action is that which procures the greatest happiness for the greatest number. But within this seemingly straightforward framework lies a crucial debate. How do we determine the most ethical course of action? As we know from Ms. Kasim-Simon's report, the artificial hedonic calculus of quantifying happiness is outright complex. For example, skydiving might be exhilarating to one but terrifying to another, or a certain cultural activity might be enjoyable to one society but might be frowned upon in another. Or what could initially be pleasurable could have negative consequences later, just as how indulging in sugary treats or excessive screen time might bring immediate pleasure but can lead to health problems like obesity or vision issues in the long run. And in terms of the quality of happiness, we cannot quantify which is of more utility or well being between the passionate, fleeting fulfillment of this artist against this accountant's financial stability. Moreover, can we justify a wrongdoing if it can make more people happy? And above all these complexities, the future is uncertain. Predicting the future impact of our actions on happiness is nearly impossible. Thus, enter act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. This is where these two approaches offer distinct paths through moral dilemmas and somehow address the said issue. Definitively, in Pojman's book, act utilitarianism is the determination of an act that is right if and only if it results in as much good as any available alternative. Rule utilitarianism, on the other hand, is an act that is right if and only if it is required by a rule that is itself a member of a set of rules whose acceptance would lead to a greater utility for the society than any available alternative. Put simply, act utilitarianism emphasizes analyzing the consequences of our actions and do what brings the maximum utility for the greatest population involved, while utilitarianism asserts that the best chance of maximizing the utility is by following the set of rules that lead to the greatest good and that we can never go wrong by following these rules. Now, how can we best utilize these frameworks to navigate the complexities of the moral landscape? So let's zoom in first on the act utilitarianism. The core principle of act utilitarianism is that the morally right action is the one that results in the greatest good for the greatest number of people in a specific situation. Famous act utilitarians also include Jeremy Bentham. He is an English philosopher and prolific writer who is the founding father of utilitarianism. He laid the foundation for act utilitarianism by emphasizing the evaluation of individual actions based on their consequences for maximizing the overall happiness. Secondly, John Stuart Mill broadened this by prioritizing the quality of happiness for the greater value of intellectual pursuits and meaningful experiences over simple pleasures. And in the 20th century, Richard Mervyn Hare brought new life to utilitarianism. He argued that the moral reasoning should follow a logical path and that focusing on maximizing good consequences provides a rational way to make the moral decisions. And notably, the strengths of this utilitarian approach are one, in terms of flexibility, it enables us to consider adapting actions to unique contexts, potentially leading to better outcomes. Two, its focus on consequences. It encourages us to consider the actual impact of our choices on happiness. Three, creative solutions. This demands innovative thinking to find the best option for overall well being. On the other side, its weaknesses are one, difficulty in predicting consequences. It is challenging to accurately predict the impact of our actions, especially for often that we must act spontaneously and quickly. Second, moral uncertainty. Complex situations might lack a clear best option, leading to dilemmas. And lastly, the potential for justifying harm. In extreme cases, the greater good might seem to justify harming the minority. Now, to further solidify our understanding of the act utilitarianism, let us explore this thought experiment. So, the scenario goes like this. You're an engineer and on duty at a busy bridge control center. Sensors detect a critical structural failure developing in a major suspension bridge. The bridge is currently crowded with rush hour traffic carrying hundreds of people, and you have two options. Option A, you are to initiate an emergency evacuation of the bridge, and this would cause traffic chaos and potential accidents. But everyone would have a chance to escape before the collapse. However, some injuries might occur during the evacuation itself. Option B. Don't initiate an evacuation and hope the bridge holds until rush hour traffic subsides. This avoids the chaos of an evacuation, but if the bridge collapses during rush hour, the casualty rate would be significantly higher. So, in terms of the act utilitarian approach, our first step should be to identify the consequences. If we choose option A, the consequence would be that evacuation will cause some injuries but prevent a catastrophic collapse. But if we choose option B, there would be no immediate disruption, but you will be risking a higher death toll if that bridge collapses during the peak traffic. Second, from a utilitarian perspective, the goal is to minimize suffering and maximize well being. While an evacuation might cause injuries, it's likely to save more lives compared to a full bridge collapse. And third, if we are to weigh the outcomes, then we would need to weigh the potential benefits. We can have benefits in preventing a mass casualty event against the potential harms of injuries during the evacuation. So the choice, what could be our choice? Based on the act utilitarianism, the most logical choice would be to initiate the emergency evacuation. Because while some injuries are likely, they would be far fewer than the potential deaths in a complete bridge collapse. But this relative answer of ours, though may seem leaning towards a clear answer, which is to initiate the evacuation, there is always a caveat. For this instance, there is an imperfect information. The exact timing of the collapse is unknown. Evacuating too early might also cause unnecessary disruption if the bridge holds. So, despite this uncertainty, minimizing the potential suffering favors our immediate action. So, in conclusion, this thought experiment showcases an example of act utilitarianism with a relatively definite answer. The engineer prioritizing the safety of the many would likely choose to initiate the evacuation to prevent a catastrophic bridge collapse. Now, how did it come about that rule utilitarianism was created after the act utilitarianism? Well, the act utilitarian rule, which is to do the act that maximizes utility, is too general for most purposes. Often, we find ourselves in doubt or have less time to decide whether lying will truly produce more utility than truth telling, for example. So, in times like these, we need a more specific rule prescribing truthfulness that passes the test of rational scrutiny. Thus, the rule utilitarianism is coined. So, how does rule utilitarianism play in several similar moral dilemmas? So, rule utilitarianism is the power of established rules. The core principle of this utilitarian approach is that it promotes consistency and predictability by prioritizing established moral rules over the specific consequences of an individual action in a given situation. We, Meaning we put more trust in that we can do the right thing by following rules since morality is a social and public institution, and by that we need to coordinate and validate our actions with others so that we can have reliable expectations about the results of our decisions. And notable rule utilitarians include John Stuart Mill, and though often he was associated with act utilitarianism due to his overall contributions to the theory, he also recognized the practicality and social order that rules can provide, even if they don't always lead to the best outcome in every single situation. Secondly, John Leslie Mackey, a prominent 20th century philosopher, is considered a strong advocate for rule utilitarianism, as he argued that following established moral rules, even if imperfect, generally leads to better outcomes in the long run compared to the complexities and uncertainties of constantly analyzing the consequences of every action. And lastly, Richard Brandt. He is another influential figure in 20th century ethics, and he argued for a form of rule utilitarianism that emphasized morality as a social practice. He believed that following established rules, even if the arbitrary in origin, could promote social cooperation and ultimately lead to greater overall happiness. The strength that we can note from rule utilitarianism is one, social order. Established rules contribute to a stable and predictable society. Second, it reduces moral dilemmas. The rules provide clear guidelines, lessening confusion in most situations. And third, its long-term benefits. Rules often promote societal well-being beyond the immediate consequences of a single act. And on the other side, its weaknesses. First is inflexibility. Rules might not be suitable for unique situations because they potentially lead to suboptimal outcomes in specific cases. And second, blind adherence. Following the rules strictly can lead to ignoring the specifics of a situation. And lastly, difficulty in establishing universal rules. Sometimes reaching agreement on universally accepted rules can be also challenging. And rule utilitarianism, according to Poachman, uses a three-level hierarchy of rules to guide moral actions that maximize the good or utility. The first level has basic rules like don't lie, and that should almost always be followed. If this conflict bring harm to someone, the second order rules like the prioritizing of avoiding serious harm take over. Finally, the top level or sometimes called the remainder rule applies act utilitarianism directly when no other rules are relevant. This means that you should make the choice that brings the most good in that specific situation. The example highlights how the rule to help someone in need might override keeping a promise. But when there's no clear-cut rule, like how to spend extra money, it's not about lying or it's not about protecting someone, then here you can use the act utilitarianism to decide what brings the most good. Applying this approach, let's consider this thought experiment entitled The Cracked Sidewalk. So here's the scenario. You're a civil engineer working for a city maintenance department. During a routine inspection of a busy pedestrian walkway, you discover a small crack developing in a section of the concrete sidewalk. While not an immediate tripping hazard, the crack could widen over time and potentially become a safety concern for pedestrians, especially those with mobility limitations. So your options is one, follow the regulations and recommend repair. Report the crack to your supervisor and recommend scheduling repairs for the sidewalk section. This would involve temporary closure of the affected section, causing some inconvenience for pedestrians who use that route. Your second option then would be to monitor and delay the repair. Here, you would continue monitoring the crack and delay any repairs until it becomes a more significant tripping hazard. This avoids immediate disruptions to pedestrian traffic, but it risks the crack worsening and potentially causing injuries in the future. So, in the rule utilitarianism approach, first is we have to identify the existing rules. So the engineering codes emphasize maintaining the safety and functionality of public infrastructure, including sidewalks. Additionally, there might be regulations requiring repairs for sidewalk cracks exceeding a certain size. Secondly, we have to determine the consequences of following the rule. So that would be repairing the crack will cause some temporary inconvenience for the pedestrians using that section. But it prioritizes the pedestrian safety and adherence to safety regulations. Third, how about if we break the rule? The consequence is that monitoring and delaying repairs might avoid immediate disruption, but it risks the crack worsening and becoming a tripping hazard that could lead to pedestrian injuries, potential lawsuits against the city, and a loss of public trust in infrastructure maintenance practices. So our choice would be with an alternative to immediate consequence of complete closure would be to prioritize establish safety regulations and prevent future injuries. However, a complete closure for immediate repairs isn't the only solution. We can yield here an alternative or compromise to get halfway between following the rules and protecting the pedestrians. So, our possible alternative to this immediate consequence is phased repair and signage. Propose a phased repair plan, starting with a temporary patch or sealant to stabilize the crack while minimizing disruption to pedestrian traffic. This allows for immediate action to address the issue while pedestrians can still use the sidewalk with caution. Additionally, instill a clear signage warning pedestrians about the uneven surface and potential tripping hazard. In this way, we uphold safety regulations and proactive maintenance that are crucial for preventing pedestrian injuries, while we also minimize disruption. This phased repair with a temporary patch allows for immediate action while minimizing the closure time for pedestrians. Then the signage further promotes safety and awareness while the section is under repair. In conclusion, following the rule and prioritizing pedestrian safety, but with a phased repair plan and signage as an alternative to immediate closure, is the most beneficial choice from a rule utilitarian perspective. But here, it's also important to note that this is just one possible interpretation. Some engineers, under pressure to minimize costs or avoid disruptions, might prioritize delaying the repairs. Secondly, that we must remember rule utilitarianism doesn't eliminate difficult choices. There's still a need for engineers to exercise judgment in considering the consequences and finding creative solutions that uphold safety rules and regulations while minimizing the disruptions to the public. So now that we've differentiated the two approaches to utilitarianism, I'm pretty sure that you also now have debating thoughts between these ethical thresholds, and you're not alone. On the side of act utilitarianism, supported by Kai Nielsen, a popular American professor at the University of Calgary in Alberta, Canada, who just recently died in 2021, he argues that evaluating each action based on its consequences and choosing the one that maximizes overall happiness. He obviously attacks the moral conservatism through this, and he believes that there are no sacred rules, and any rule can be overridden if a different course of action leads to a better outcome. While on the side of the rule utilitarianism, several rule utilitarians emphasize following the established moral rules, even if they don't always lead to the best outcome in every situation, because they more likely impose the good in the long run. But despite this debate, we certainly can't deny the significance of this moral theory. Utilitarianism has been a major force in ethical thinking for many centuries, influencing various aspects of society like social reform, political decisions, animal rights, and even bioethics, and more. Particularly, as organized by Fojman, there are three strengths of utilitarianism. First is it has a single clear principle. It provides us a clear and simple rule, which is to maximize utility or happiness and well-being. This offers a decision-making procedure for any situation. Second, focus on well-being. It focuses on human flourishing and reducing suffering, which most people find appealing because it goes beyond just following the rules and aims to help people. Third, considering the future generation. It provides a reason to care about future generations by emphasizing the maximizing of the total well-being throughout time, even for those who don't exist yet. So, in conclusion, considering this discussion on act and rule utilitarianism, we have highlighted the tension between flexibility and consistency. Flexibility in terms that we considered the specific consequences of each action per situation, and that we allow for more nuanced decision making. And then in consistency, we follow established rules to promote predictability and reduce the burden of constantly calculating consequences. And ultimately, these two approaches aim to maximize utility, but they differ in how they achieve it. The best approach might depend on the specific situation and the potential for negative consequences. And that ends my discussion about act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. Thank you so much for listening.